My husband hit me when I was pregnant, and because of him, my children were born prematurely. But he never imagined that my revenge would be even more lethal. The silence in the house was heavy, but what was truly unsettling was the feeling that something was about to explode. Isabella, her belly tight and her lips dry, held her phone with trembling hands. Her breathing was erratic. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The glow of the screen illuminated her pale face as she blinked, hoping her eyes were deceiving her. The number on her bank account stared back at her like a death sentence. Available balance, $0. Dizziness hit her like a violent wave. Her money. Everything she had saved with so much effort, everything she needed for her baby's arrival, was gone. No, she whispered, feeling the air leave her lungs. Her fingers slid over the screen as she refreshed the app over and over, hoping for a miracle. Nothing changed. Panic took hold of her body. She felt a weight on her chest, an unbearable pressure threatening to suffocate her. Her first instinct was to find Leonardo. He had to know what was going on. Struggling, she walked down the hallway to the living room. He was there, as if nothing had happened, lounging on the couch with a beer bottle in one hand and his phone in the other. Leonardo, her voice barely came out, strangled by fear and disbelief. He didn't even look up. Leonardo, what happened to our money? The sound of the television seemed to grow louder. He scrolled through his phone, completely ignoring her. Leonardo, I'm talking to you. Her voice broke, a plea disguised as a demand. He let out a heavy sigh and finally looked at her with annoyance, as if she were just another nuisance in his day. What now? The account. Our money. Isabella swallowed hard. It's empty. A flicker of impatience crossed Leonardo's face before a mocking smile curled his lips. Oh, that. Yeah, I used it. The ground beneath her feet seemed to crumble. You used it? Her voice was barely a whisper. On what? Leonardo stretched, as if the matter was of no importance. Then, with absolute calm, he took a sip of his beer and looked at her with complete indifference. On Camila's wedding. The impact of those words knocked the breath out of her. What? Yeah, we rented a spectacular venue. Luxury decor, gourmet food. Important people don't attend third-rate weddings, you know? Isabella's head buzzed. The world spun around her, the air growing thicker. Leonardo, that money was for the birth, for our children. He raised an eyebrow and shrugged. Well, you'll have to find another solution. Her blood boiled. Her jaw clenched, her hands curled into fists. Another solution? How could you do this without even talking to me? Leonardo sighed, setting his beer down. His dark gaze met hers with a coldness that sent chills down her spine. Don't exaggerate, Isabella. It's not the end of the world. For you, it isn't. Her voice trembled with contained fury. But for me, it is. For our children, it is. What are we supposed to do now? You always figure things out. I can't believe you just said that, her voice cracked. You left us with nothing. Leonardo's face hardened, and his eyes gleamed with something dark, dangerous. Don't talk to me like that. How do you want me to talk to you, Leonardo? With gratitude? With admiration? Her voice rose. You've left us with no money, no options. And you don't care at all. A tick appeared in Leonardo's jaw. His fingers curled into a fist. Isabella, shut up. No, she shouted, feeling her control shatter. I won't shut up, because this isn't fair. The sound of his hand slapping her face echoed through the room like thunder. Isabella felt the sting before she even processed what had just happened. Her head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the blow, the brutal slap she had just received. A sharp pain spread across her cheek, and the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Don't ever talk to me like that again, Leonardo growled, his voice dripping with venom. Tears burned in Isabella's eyes, but not from physical pain. It was rage, betrayal, the absolute certainty that the man standing in front of her was no longer the same man she had married. Instinctively, she placed a hand on her stomach, protecting the only thing that truly mattered. Go to hell, Leonardo. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried an uncontrollable fury. He let out a dry chuckle and walked away, picking up his beer again as if nothing had happened. "I'm already there, darling." Isabella felt the ground sway beneath her feet. The pain in her stomach made her double over slightly. Her breathing turned ragged. Something was wrong. A sharp cramp shot through her entire body. No, not now. She clutched her abdomen, trying to steady her erratic breathing. Her children. A wave of dizziness overwhelmed her, and in an attempt to hold onto something, she collapsed to her knees. Her phone vibrated in her hand. With trembling fingers, she unlocked the screen. A message. "Camila, how are you? You haven't answered all day." "I'm worried." Isabella's heart pounded against her chest. Her fingers typed the only word she could think of. "Help." Tears streamed down her face as her body trembled. The phone rang immediately. "Isabella, what's going on?" Camila's voice was thick with alarm. Isabella tried to speak, but only a strangled sob escaped her throat. "Isabella, breathe. Where are you? What happened?" Her voice was barely audible. "Leonardo. I'm on my way. Don't move." The phone slipped from her hand. Her strength was fading. Leonardo didn't even look at her as she curled up on the floor, clutching her stomach, holding on to the only hope she had left. She couldn't lose her babies. She couldn't let him win. The lights in the house seemed to dim. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the front door, slightly ajar. An escape. And beyond that door, her only salvation was on its way. Darkness wrapped around her like a lead blanket. There was no time or space in her mind to understand what was happening, only the sensation of emptiness, cold, and loss. Something inside her was slowly fading, and the only sign of life she had left was the trembling vibration of her phone on the floor. An engine roared in the distance. Headlights cut through the dimness, sliding across the walls of the house. Someone stepped out of the vehicle in a hurry, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Camila didn't need to knock on the door. She found it slightly open, as if fate itself had left her a direct path into the nightmare. As she crossed the threshold, her heart stopped. Isabella was on the floor. Her body curled into a fetal position, her face covered in a sheen of cold sweat and a dark bruise shadowing her cheek. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. The most terrifying part was her hand resting on her abdomen, clutching it desperately, as if trying to protect the last thing she had left in the world. "Isabella." Camila rushed to her, dropping to her knees. "Look at me." Isabella's eyes fluttered slowly, but they weren't focused. "My babies," she whispered, her voice barely a thread of sound. A chill ran down Camila's spine. Something inside her screamed that there was no time for questions. "We have to get out of here." Her hands slid under Isabella's arms, lifting her with effort. Her friend's body was ice cold and far too light, as if life itself were slipping away. With the strength of desperation, she dragged her out of the house and into the passenger seat. As she shut the door and ran around the car to get into the driver's side, her eyes flicked back to the house. Something unsettled her. It wasn't just the way the door remained slightly ajar, as if a hungry void was watching from within. It was the feeling that someone was observing them. She forced herself to shake off the thought and started the car. The sound of the engine was the only thing breaking the silence. The road blurred into streaks of light and shadow. Camila kept one hand firm on the wheel while the other clutched Isabella's, who lay against the window, her skin pale, her lips parting in shallow, uneven breaths. "Isabella, stay with me," Camila murmured, pressing the accelerator. No response. Anxiety gripped her chest. "Damn it, answer me." Isabella's eyes barely cracked open, just enough to keep hope from shattering completely. "It hurts." "I know. We're almost there. Just hold on a little longer." Isabella shifted in her seat, another wave of pain tearing through her stomach. Her fingers clutched her belly harder, searching for any sign of her babies. Any movement. Any response. Nothing. They weren't moving. The strangled gasp that escaped her lips had no sound, but her panic screamed everything. Camila glanced at her and understood without a single word. The hospital lights appeared on the horizon like a beacon in the storm. Camila slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car. "Help!" Her voice cut through the automatic doors, crashing into the emergency room. "My friend is pregnant, and something's wrong." 2 nurses and a doctor rushed over with a stretcher. Camila led them to the car, where Isabella barely clung to consciousness. "My babies." "I don't feel them," she whispered. The doctor gave a grave nod and signaled to the nurses. With swift but gentle movements, they transferred her onto the stretcher and wheeled her inside. Camila tried to follow, but a nurse blocked her path. "She can't go in." "But she's my friend." "The doctors need space to work." Camila felt the helplessness tearing her apart inside as she watched Isabella disappear down the hallway. The echo of footsteps on the shiny floor blended with the sound of monitors and the hurried voices of doctors. Oxygen saturation at 85%. Blood pressure dropping. Baby's heart rate unstable. The intermittent beep of the monitor turned into a looming threat. Isabella wanted to speak, but her throat wouldn't respond. She could barely turn her head enough to see the doctor. "Please." The doctor tilted his head toward her, as if understanding that the only answer she needed was the truth. "We'll do everything we can, but the babies need to be born now." Her mind clouded. She couldn't process what she was hearing. "It's too early. We have no other choice." Isabella felt the tears well up in her eyes. The room filled with more doctors and nurses. The atmosphere was cold and clinical, but the pressure pressing down on her chest had nothing to do with the temperature. The pain intensified. "Isabella, you need to push," said a nurse with a firm but gentle voice. She couldn't. She wasn't ready. "Push." Isabella's body arched in pain. The monitor emitted a sharp beep. "It's coming." The first cry of a baby broke the tension. Isabella could barely lift her head when she saw a nurse take her baby away. "It's a boy," announced the doctor. Her heart beat harder. But then, the atmosphere shifted. The monitors spiked again. "The second baby, his heart rate is dropping." The desperation in the doctor's voice hit her harder than the physical pain. "Isabella, you need to do it again." She had no strength left. But her baby... Summoning everything she had left, Isabella pushed once more. Nothing. The silence stretched on too long. "There's no heartbeat." A nurse's cry left her breathless. "No, not again. Give him chest compressions." The doctor's hands moved at a frantic pace. Isabella felt her soul detach from her body. Then, the most beautiful sound in the world filled the room. The cry of her baby. Reality shattered. The voices became a distant echo. There was only one thing in her mind. Her children were alive. Her body collapsed against the stretcher, exhausted. Tears fell down her cheeks, but this time, they were tears of relief. The nurse approached with her babies wrapped in blankets. Isabella's eyes barely managed to focus on them. They were so small, so fragile. She held them with the gentleness of someone who knows they are holding the meaning of their existence. And in that moment, she knew. She would never allow Leonardo to hurt them again. He had stolen her money. He had destroyed her trust. He had nearly destroyed her life. But he wouldn't take what truly mattered. He wouldn't take her children. With that thought, she closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she felt peace. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and forced calm. The dim light of the lamp flickered weakly on the nightstand, casting shadows on the white walls. Isabella wasn't sleeping. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The soft sound of her babies breathing, asleep in their small cribs beside her, was the only thing that kept her grounded in reality. She couldn't go on like this. She couldn't keep living in fear. Leonardo had crossed the final line. He hadn't just left her with no money, hadn't just beaten and abandoned her, but he had put her children's lives at risk. And she would never forgive him for that. She turned her gaze to the phone on the nightstand. Her trembling hand picked it up and unlocked the screen. There were no messages from him. No calls, no questions. As if she had disappeared from his world. As if everything they had built together meant nothing. But if Leonardo thought she was going to stay silent, he was wrong. "I won't sit here suffering like a victim," she whispered, feeling the determination settle in her chest. "I'm going to destroy him." Isabella gritted her teeth and opened the messaging app. "Camila, I need to see you." Not even 2 minutes passed before her phone vibrated with a response. "I'm on my way." The sound of Camila's heels echoed down the hall before the door to the room creaked open. The expression on her face said it all. "Tell me what you need, and I'll do it," was the first thing she said, dropping her bag onto the chair and crossing her arms. Isabella looked at her babies, their small bodies rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Then her gaze hardened. "I'm going to divorce Leonardo." Camila nodded without surprise. "I already figured that out, but I don't want it to be a normal divorce. I don't want him to have the option to fight for my children, and I don't want him to walk away from this without consequences. I want him to pay." Camila exhaled sharply, walking closer to the bed. "Are you sure about this? Leonardo is not a man who accepts losing. He left me with nothing. He beat me when I was pregnant. If I let him go, he'll do it again and again. Not just to me, but to anyone." Camila's eyes flashed with understanding and something else. Something dark. "All right. I know someone who can help us." The corridors of the lawyer's office were cold and elegant. Isabella and Camila waited in the small waiting room in silence. The name Arturo Salvatierra was engraved on the solid wooden door. "They say he's the best at tough cases," whispered Camila. Isabella stared at the closed door with a serious expression. "I need this." An assistant let them in. Arturo, a man with graying hair and relentless eyes, greeted them without any pleasantries. "Leonardo Velasco." "Yes, I know him," he said, reviewing some documents. "He has a questionable reputation." "What's the goal?" Isabella held his gaze. "I want to leave him with nothing." Arturo leaned over the table, interlacing his fingers. "That can be done. But I need information, evidence. Something that can bring him down." Camila cleared her throat. "I found something, and I think it's big." She opened her phone and slid a series of photos toward Arturo. In each one, Leonardo was with a different woman. The same woman. "His mistress is named Valentina Mendoza," explained Camila. "She's not just any woman. She's a con artist." Isabella felt a chill. "Are you sure?" Camila smiled coldly. "I did the research. Her track record is impressive. She's ruined rich men, emptied bank accounts, and disappeared without a trace." Arturo nodded slowly. "If Leonardo has fallen into her hands, we have a golden opportunity." Isabella took a deep breath. "I want to talk to her." Camila raised an eyebrow. "Talk to her? For what?" "Because if what you're saying is true, she has no loyalty to him. If we convince her to join us, we can take him down faster." Camila crossed her arms. "It's a risk. It's worth it." The cafe was a discreet, almost anonymous place. Isabella waited at the corner table, watching the door carefully. The woman who walked in had an air of dangerous confidence. Her black hair cascaded in waves over her shoulders, and her red lips contrasted with her pale skin. She moved like the world belonged to her. Valentina Mendoza. She sat across from Isabella and smirked mockingly. "I don't usually meet with scorned wives, but you've piqued my curiosity." Isabella didn't react to the provocation. "I know who you are." Valentina raised an eyebrow. "Everyone knows who I am." "I'm not talking about your name. I'm talking about what you do." Valentina's smile froze. "That's dangerous to say. What's dangerous is what will happen to you if you don't cooperate." Valentina leaned back in the chair, evaluating her with a look. "Interesting. And what do you want from me?" Isabella leaned over the table. "I know you're draining Leonardo's accounts. And I don't want to stop you. I want to speed it up." Valentina's face lit up with calculated amusement. "Keep talking." Leonardo walked toward the restaurant's cash register with the confidence of a man who had everything under control. He extended his credit card with the ease of someone who had never been rejected. The cashier swiped the card through the reader. Silence. The reader emitted a dry beep. "There seems to be a problem, sir." Leonardo frowned. "Impossible. Try again." The cashier did. Nothing. Leonardo pulled out another card. Another attempt. Nothing. A sense of discomfort began to settle in his chest. Let it go, I'll pay. Valentina's voice sounded with a poisonous sweetness. Leonardo forced a smile, but inside, his mind was already racing. As they left the restaurant, he pulled out his phone, opened his banking app. Numbers that didn't add up. Money that wasn't there. Accounts at zero. A cold sensation ran through him. Something wrong? Valentina asked with an innocent expression. Leonardo clenched his jaw. I need to go to the bank. The call to the bank solved nothing. His money was slowly disappearing in transactions he hadn't authorized. This can't be. He searched his mind for any logical explanation. Then, an image formed clearly. Isabella. The news of Leonardo's financial collapse reached Isabella's ears like a whisper of justice. Camila sat across from her with a victorious smile. It's over. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the relief flow through her body. No, it wasn't over yet. But it was close. The glass of whiskey trembled in Leonardo's hand. His jaw was so tight he could feel his teeth grinding. The bar lights were dim, a mix of neon and shadows barely managing to keep his mind in reality. His account was at zero. All his cards had been declined. His money, his empire, his entire life was crumbling before his eyes, and he had no idea how it had happened. He looked at his phone, frowning, scrolling through bank transactions he didn't recognize. Exorbitant amounts had disappeared in mysterious transfers to overseas accounts. His thumb nervously slid across the screen, searching for the last number that could give him answers. Valentina's name glowed in the recent contacts. He called. Nothing. He called again. The tone sounded once, twice, 3 times. Then the cold, automated message. The number you dialed is not available. Leonardo's blood boiled in his veins. He stood up so quickly that the black leather chair screeched across the floor. He pushed the table in anger, spilling whiskey everywhere. The murmurs around him grew louder. A couple of customers looked at him curiously, but no one dared say anything. He staggered out of the bar, his mind a storm of rage and disbelief. Valentina had betrayed him. The cold of the night cut into his skin as he dialed another number, one of his bank contacts. The voice of the manager was heard on the other end, tense, filled with a fake politeness that hid problems. Mr. Velasco, we've tried to reach you several times. There's been a series of unusual transactions. I know, Leonardo roared, rushing down the sidewalk. Tell me what the hell happened to my money? The manager paused awkwardly. Sir, all transactions were made with your authorization. Your signature and credentials were verified with every move. Leonardo felt a knot in his stomach. That's impossible. I didn't authorize anything. The evidence says otherwise. He hung up without saying goodbye. It had been a mistake. A damn mistake. Everything would be fixed. There had to be a way to reverse what was happening. But then, his phone rang. An unknown number. Leonardo Velasco? The voice on the other end was dry, bureaucratic. Who's speaking? This is the Financial Investigations Unit. We need you to come to the station to answer some questions about suspicious movements in your accounts. The call was disconnected. The air felt heavy in his lungs. Now he was really screwed. The courtroom was thick with tension. Leonardo sat at the defense table, his jaw tight, his knuckles white from clenching his fists. Across from him, the prosecutor flipped through documents with a calculating expression. The judge entered, banging the gavel against the wood. Court is in session. Leonardo took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. His lawyer gave him a quick glance before leaning in and whispering in his ear. The evidence is too strong. We have no way to appeal this. Fear settled in his chest like a cold stone. There has to be something, he whispered through clenched teeth. The prosecutor stood, adjusting his tie calmly. Your Honor, the charges against the defendant include bank fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. We have compelling evidence that he transferred large sums of money to foreign accounts without declaring them. Leonardo felt everyone's gaze on him. I didn't do any of this. The judge slammed the gavel. Silence in the courtroom. The prosecutor continued. We've traced every transaction, and each one was signed by the defendant. They forged my signature. Someone set me up. The judge looked at him with an impenetrable gaze. Do you have any proof of that, Mr. Velasco? Leonardo remained silent. I don't have proof, but then the court will proceed with the case. The world was collapsing around him. The bars of the cell were cold to the touch. Leonardo let himself fall onto the concrete bench, his mind repeating the same phrase over and over again. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. The sound of a guard's footsteps pulled him out of his stupor. You have a visitor. They took him to a small room, separated by thick glass. And there she was. Isabella. His ex-wife was watching him from the other side with a chilling calm. Leonardo picked up the phone that connected both sides, and she did the same. Enjoying your stay? Her voice was soft, almost mocking. Leonardo felt the rage bubbling in his throat. It was you. I have no idea what you're talking about. It was you, you damn bitch. You ruined me. Isabella tilted her head, not losing her composure. You ruined yourself, Leonardo. I just gave you a little push. Leonardo punched the glass with his fist. I'm getting out of here. Isabella smiled. No, you're not. Camila's car was parked at the entrance to the courthouse. How are you feeling? She asked as Isabella got in. Free. Camila smiled. She deserved it. Isabella looked at the sky through the window. For the first time in a long while, she breathed without fear. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what happened, she would never again be the woman who let someone like Leonardo destroy her. Weeks later, the wind shook the curtains of Isabella's new house. The light of the sunset filtered through the windows, painting the walls in golden and orange tones. The sound of her baby's calm breathing was the only thing breaking the silence. She stood there, in the doorway of her room, watching them with a mixture of awe and relief. For the first time in a long while, she could say she was safe. The small apartment she now lived in didn't have luxuries or great comforts, but it was hers. It was her refuge, the place where she didn't have to fear what would come next. Every corner of that home was proof that she had survived. She took a deep breath, feeling her muscles relax. She allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment. There were no screams, no threats, no clenched fists in the air waiting to hit her. Just the sound of calm, that peace she had once thought impossible. The doorbell pulled her out of her thoughts. She quickly walked to the door and opened it without even asking who it was. There was no need. Only one person knocked with that kind of insistence. Camila smiled when she saw her, holding a bottle of wine in one hand and a bag of food in the other. You can't move into a new house without a celebration. Isabella laughed and gestured for her to come in. Celebration? I can barely keep my eyes open. Camila put the things on the table and collapsed onto the sofa. Well, get used to it, because I'm definitely going to celebrate. Isabella looked at her with curiosity as she pulled out the glasses and poured the wine. Why do you have that satisfied look on your face? Camila lifted her glass and slowly spun it between her fingers. Because you achieved something many women can't. You got out of a toxic relationship, you freed yourself from a dangerous man, and, best of all, you destroyed him before he could hurt you more. Isabella took her glass and sipped without saying anything. I didn't do it alone. No, but you had the courage to do it. They stayed silent for a few seconds, both lost in their thoughts. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never met him, Isabella said suddenly. Camila looked at her carefully. You can't think like that. Life isn't a list of wrong choices. It's what you do with what you have after you fall. Isabella set her glass on the table and put her hands over her face. I have a hard time understanding how I ended up here. Everything happened so fast. Camila leaned forward. You have to stop seeing the past as a burden. Of course, it hurt. Of course, it was hell. But you got out of it. And now you're here, with your kids, with a new life. What if he comes back? Isabella whispered, not daring to look at her friend. Camila pressed her lips together and slid her hand over Isabella's in a comforting gesture. He won't come back. But the tone of her voice betrayed something she didn't want to say out loud. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that possibility. The fluorescent lights in the prison flickered with a faint glow. Leonardo was sitting on the concrete bench in his cell, arms crossed, his gaze lost in the void. The trial had been a spectacle. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that even his own lawyer had stopped trying to defend him. He knew his sentence would be long. He knew his life outside was over. But that didn't mean it was finished. A guard approached the bars and slid an envelope under the cell. "You've got mail." Leonardo frowned. "From who?" The guard shrugged and walked away. Leonardo carefully took the envelope. It had no sender. He tore the paper and pulled out a small sheet. His eyes locked onto the words written in black ink. "This isn't over yet." A shiver ran through his body like an electric shock. It wasn't Isabella. It wasn't Valentina. It was someone else. And whoever it was, they hadn't finished with him. He smiled coldly. "Interesting." Isabella stepped out onto the balcony of her apartment and hugged herself, enjoying the night breeze. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. This isn't over yet. She felt the cold of the night turn to ice in her blood. The message had no signature, no clues, no context. But she didn't need that. The fear she thought she'd left behind came back like an unstoppable wave. She slowly turned and looked out onto the street. In the distance, under the light of a street lamp, a shadow moved between the cars. Someone was watching. The story wasn't over yet. Isabella's heart was pounding uncontrollably. The sense of safety she had felt up until that moment crumbled in an instant. Her mind tried to find a logical explanation. It could be a prank, a wrong message, her own paranoia, but the instinct that had kept her alive so many times told her otherwise. She slowly stepped back, closed the balcony door with trembling hands, and pulled the curtains. She couldn't let fear take over her again. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but the shadow on the street still lingered in her mind. She grabbed her phone and dialed Camila's number. Her friend's voice sounded sleepy, but as soon as she heard Isabella's tone, her alertness kicked in. "What's wrong?" "I got a message." "From who?" "I don't know, but it said this isn't over yet." Camila's silence was brief but heavy with tension. "I'm coming over." "No, I don't want you to come alone." "Then let's call the police." "And what should I tell them? That I received an anonymous message? They won't do anything about it. What if it's Leonardo?" Isabella felt a chill just hearing his name. It can't be him, he's in prison. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have allies outside. Camila's words hit like a punch. She stayed silent, pressing the phone to her ear. "Isabella," Camila sighed. "We dealt with him, and we can deal with this." Isabella nodded, though her friend couldn't see her. "You're right. I'll trace the number. Stay inside, lock everything, and don't open the door to anyone." They hung up. Isabella looked at her reflection in the window. The image she saw disturbed her. She wasn't the strong woman who had defeated Leonardo. She was the woman who still feared. And that couldn't continue. Prison had its own code, its own law. Leonardo understood that from the first day. It wasn't a place of redemption. It was a place where predators hunted the weak. But he wasn't weak. He watched. He learned. And he waited. The message in the letter kept spinning in his head. Someone was out there moving pieces, someone who had a special interest in him. He approached a tall man with a shaved head and a scar on his cheek. "I need to make a call." The man looked at him with mockery. "And what do you give me in return?" Leonardo smiled. "I can give you something more valuable than money." The man crossed his arms. "I'm listening." Leonardo leaned in and whispered something in his ear. The man stayed silent for a few seconds, then smiled. "Interesting." He gestured and led him to a phone hidden in one of the less guarded hallways. Leonardo picked up the receiver and dialed a number he hadn't used in a long time. "I need you to do something for me." The voice on the other end was deep, impersonal. "What?" "Follow Isabella." Isabella didn't sleep that night. Every shadow, every sound, kept her on edge. The baby slept soundly, oblivious to the danger that could be lurking. Early in the morning, Camila arrived with coffee and a worried expression. "We investigated the number," she said as soon as Isabella opened the door. Isabella swallowed hard. And? Camila handed her the phone. It's registered under the name of a ghost company. Isabella's stomach churned. What does that mean? It means whoever sent it doesn't want to be traced. Oh my God. Camila grabbed her arm. Don't panic. This isn't like before. Now you have allies. Isabella felt the tears burning in her eyes, but didn't let them fall. I don't want to live in fear. Camila nodded. Then let's face it. Isabella took a deep breath. How? Camila smiled with determination. We'll find out who sent that message. And we're going to destroy them. Prison wasn't enough for someone like Leonardo. He knew the real war was fought outside. And he still had weapons. His smile widened as he hung up the phone. Isabella thought she had won. But he still had one last move. And this time, she wouldn't see it coming. The lights flickered in the damp prison halls. The smell of sweat and desperation mixed with the cold rust of the metal bars. Leonardo walked with his hands in the pockets of his beige uniform, avoiding the gazes of the other inmates. He had been planning this for weeks. Every movement, every word spoken in whispers, every favor paid with information or an empty promise. It had all led to this moment. A guard passed by him without paying much attention. Leonardo barely lifted his gaze, but inside, he smiled. He still had power. He could still make things go in his favor. Escape was his only option. The chosen night was perfect. The security was relaxed and the bribes were well placed. While the other prisoners tossed and turned in their concrete beds, he would be disappearing into the darkness. A prisoner with a vacant stare approached and passed him a tiny key wrapped in a piece of dirty cloth. Leonardo slipped it into his sleeve without saying a word. Then, another man slid a handmade knife into his hand. In case things get complicated, he murmured. Leonardo nodded and kept walking. The hour was approaching. Isabella felt an inexplicable unease. It was a gut feeling. Something inside her told her she wasn't safe. Camila was with her in the apartment, reviewing information about the anonymous number. There's no trace of who could have sent this, her friend said, frowning. But it seems like too much of a coincidence that this is happening right now. Right now? Camila exhaled, looking at Isabella seriously. Leonardo's still in jail, but... I don't know, I feel like he still has a way to reach you. The sound of the phone interrupted the conversation. Isabella looked at the screen. Unknown number. Camila leaned in. Answer it. Isabella swallowed and slid her finger across the screen. Hello? There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Then, a voice that sent chills down her spine. Isabella. Her heart stopped. It was Leonardo. The phone nearly fell out of her hands. How are you calling? Leonardo's laugh was low, almost like a whisper of a threat. You thought this was over, didn't you? Isabella felt a shiver run through her body. You're in prison. For now. Camila snatched the phone from Isabella's hand and put it on speaker. What do you want, you bastard? Camila? What a surprise. Always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. You're going to rot in that cell, Leonardo. You can't do anything to Isabella. Leonardo's laughter abruptly stopped. That's what you think. The call was cut off. Isabella looked at Camila, terrified. He has a plan. Camila clenched her fists. We'll figure it out before he does. Leonardo walked down the dark hallway, his breathing steady, his pulse stable. The maintenance door was open, just as they had agreed. The guard he bribed stepped aside without looking at him. You've got 5 minutes before the shift change. Leonardo nodded and moved through the piping area, where a grate would lead him to the outside yard. From there, the wall wasn't impossible to scale. The cars were waiting on the other side. Freedom was near. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he didn't stop. He slid through the duct and ran to the wall, where another inmate was already waiting with an improvised rope. He climbed. The night air hit his face as he reached the top. Laughter bubbled in his throat. He had made it. He jumped. And as soon as his feet hit the ground, the lights came on. Stop. The sound of multiple weapons being drawn froze him. He raised his hands, gasping for breath. The prison security patrol surrounded him. Don't make this harder, Leonardo, said one of the officers. Leonardo felt panic overtake him. He couldn't go back to that cell. He couldn't lose. He ran. The shots pierced the night. The first hit made him stagger. The second knocked him down. The third left him motionless. Blood soaked the ground as the siren wailed in the distance. Leonardo felt the cold surround him. He lay staring at the sky. Life slipped away from his fingers. And the last thing he saw was the silhouette of the guards approaching. It was all over. Isabella watched the television with trembling hands. The news was talking about an escape attempt at the maximum security prison. The headline said it all. Leonardo Velasco, businessman convicted of fraud, dies in escape attempt. The world spun around her. Camila took her hand. It's over. Isabella felt the tears fall down her cheeks. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't happiness. It was relief. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to be afraid. She got up and walked to her children's room. She watched them sleep, their little chests rising and falling peacefully. She smiled. She was free, and no one would ever take that from her again. If you liked this story, I invite you to leave a comment sharing how you felt hearing it, and if you've been through a similar situation of betrayal, I'd love for you to share your valuable opinion. I would be very honored if you leave a like, share the video with a friend or family member, and subscribe to the channel. Don't miss the next surprising story that's appearing on your screen right now. We have guaranteed entertainment exclusively for you. See you in the next video.